Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another edition of Broncos Beat. I'm Alexis Perry, joined today by Ryan Koenigsberg from DNVR, Benjamin Allbright from Broncos Country Tonight on KOA Radio, and Jeff Legwold from ESPN. Guys, given this incredibly fascinating quarterback trade market this offseason, we have to start with the big news on Thursday as the Philadelphia Eagles traded Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts for a 2021 third-round draft pick and a conditional 2022 second-round pick that could turn into a first rounder. Wentz was thrown out as a guy who some felt could be a nice fit here in Denver, but reports say George Paton and the Denver Broncos were not in on the trade for Wentz. So why do you guys feel like Paton didn't pursue Carson Wentz here for the Denver Broncos?
Well, Alexis, guys, I think this is more of a look at being able to pivot after the 2021 season if Drew Lock or whoever is in place doesn't work out. You take Carson Wentz, you're taking his contract. That's essentially a 2-year deal, really, still on the books. So this was more to me an indication that, hey, Drew Lock finished with Carson Wentz in the rankings last year in most any metric, but showed more promise and doesn't sort of need a year of football rehab to put his game back together. And Drew Lock is still on his rookie contract. So if you want to move on after the 2021 season, it's much easier to do that with a player on his rookie contract than a player who is still waiting for a 120 something million contract to kick in.
I think it comes down to simply just, if the Broncos are going to roll the dice on someone, they're going to roll the dice on Drew Lock and see if if he can put it together and become that guy. The dice roll that the Colts are taking on Carson Wentz, like Leggy pointed out, is an expensive one. But they don't have a Drew Lock in their locker room to kind of turn to. So for the Broncos, it makes sense of, okay, if we're going to take a chance on a guy, let's take a chance on our own guy who also happens to be really cheap.
Well, right. And I called the Broncos front office as soon as this stuff came out. I talked to people in there, and basically they called to get a price tag on Carson Wentz. George Paton is being smart. He wants to know the price tag, everything. So they called to get a price tag on it. And as soon as the Eagles came back with, we're looking for a Matt Stafford type deal, George Paton laughed and pretty much hung up the phone. Why is he going to spend draft capital, as Leggy pointed out there, on a guy who's not appreciably better than Drew Lock? And then be tied to him for a number of years. So Drew Lock is inexpensive, doesn't cost you anything to acquire because you already have him. And the metrics say he's at least at Carson Wentz's level of play last year with the potential for upside. So it didn't make any sense for the Broncos to be in on this to begin with. And I think they made a smart decision in not pursuing.
Okay, so no Carson Wentz, no Matthew Stafford, you guys. James Palmer, he's a friend of this program. He said a few days ago on the NFL Network that the Broncos will be active in talks with the Houston Texans if they are willing to trade Deshaun Watson. So given all this upside that Drew Lock has, do you guys feel like at this point, Watson really is the only guy worth pursuing?
Alexis, they're certainly going to look in the veteran backup market. You look at the list of free agents this year, there are plenty of guys who could come in and challenge Drew Lock if that's what they wanted. The Deshaun Watson thing, I tell people all the time, I'm intrigued by the idea I might be taller someday, but there's no chance of that. And right now, and I've spoken to plenty of people around the league and in Houston, Deshaun Watson isn't going anywhere right now. So. And if he was on the market, the line to talk about him would be very big. And, most any team in the league would say they'd be in it. So I don't see Watson right now until there's an exceptional, humongous change of heart in Houston by the people making the decisions there. I don't think that's an option right now. So if you're going to wait until the draft or even deeper than that to see if that really is an option, I think you're putting a team in a tough spot for the 2021 season. So, like Ryan said earlier, right now, rolling the dice on Drew Lock looks like the most likely option. But, I'd certainly be intrigued with Jameis Winston. I don't know what you guys think, but to me, I'm, well worth a shot on the free agency market and going to be a bargain buy for a former guy, number one, top of the board guy. So I think that's the route they should take. And I think ultimately they do, but they're, like Ben said, they're going to kick the tires on everything. If you're George Payton and you don't make those calls, that's football malpractice. You got to check in and see what is the price of a trade here, and could you pull that off?
And to your original question, there's a couple pipe dream scenarios, just like Deshaun Watson, that could also, be intriguing. If Dak Prescott becomes a free agent, that's something you want to explore. If Russell Wilson demands a trade, that's something you want to explore. Of course, those are the ones that are like, okay, if you have an opportunity to get this guy, you get him. And if you can, and he comes in and he's the starter over Drew Lock, guaranteed. But other than that, it is most of those that Leggy mentioned, like Jameis Winston, where even if you bring in Jameis Winston, you're still probably keeping Drew Lock around and letting those two go at it and seeing what happens out of it.
Yeah, everybody I've talked to in Houston says the same thing that Leggy just said. Deshaun Watson is not actually even available for trade. They're convinced he's going to be their quarterback this year, and if he's not, they're okay with letting him sit. His contract won't toll. He's not like he's flush with the money. He just signed a big deal. So this is a situation where Deshaun Watson really has almost no leverage whatsoever, and they need to figure that out. And then if he does hit the market, they suggested that as Leggy said, the line would be a mile long, and the Broncos are probably somewhere in the middle of that, not really at the front. So, I think it's fun to talk about. It'd certainly be fun to have Deshaun Watson here, but if you're looking at a Texas quarterback and you're a Broncos fan, you got your eye on the wrong one. Dak Prescott's the one to keep your eye on. If he hits free agency, Broncos don't have to give anything up for him. That's the one you want to be looking at.
Like you guys said, the greatest shot is that Drew Lock will be the starter here week 1 for the Denver Broncos. So RK, I got to know, will you be satisfied if that's the case?
Yeah, satisfied is a tough word. I think you're in wait and see mode. Drew Lock is still an intriguing prospect at quarterback to me. He's shown the flashes. I think he has what it takes. He has the makeup of a guy who can make it in this league. He certainly has a lot to work on. And I think, the second year in a system, which is something he hasn't done since his junior year of college, which happened to be the best, football year of his career, will be really beneficial to him. Having Cortland Sutton back will be really beneficial to him. There's a lot of things that you can use to talk yourself into Drew Lock. And again, like we talked about earlier, if it doesn't work out with him, you're not in a bad position. You're not stuck with him. You can move on next year.
All right, guys, don't go anywhere. Still to come on Broncos Beat, how might the NFL's lowered salary cap affect the futures of some of your favorite members of this Denver defense? These guys will tell you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to Broncos Beat. Alexis Perry here alongside Ryan Koenigsberg, Benjamin Allbright, and Jeff Legwold. Guys, the NFL's 2021 salary cap has not yet been finalized, but a new memo was sent out on Thursday to teams reading that the cap floor has been raised to $180 million. While we don't know the ceiling quite yet, we do know that it won't be near last year's $198.2 million. So with that said, what is your current assessment of this Broncos cap situation, and how will this lowered cap dictate how the Broncos tackle Von Miller's club option, Ben?
Well, the floor is 180. We don't know the ceiling. League sources suggested that's going to be around, 185, 187, somewhere in there. So there's a little bit more money in there potentially to play with. You got to remember, you need about $9 million to sign your rookie draft class if you have all your picks, give or take. So once you take that out of the equation, you start to look at this and start to chase the money down. It feels like the Broncos are actually in pretty good cap shape with the amount that can roll forward and everything else. They have quite a bit of flexibility. And then when Jarrell Casey comes off the injured, that's another move you can make that clears up cap space with no dead cap whatsoever. So the Broncos are actually in really good shape as far as this kind of stuff goes. Now they're trying to work with Von to get a restructure extension done, get that number down. We'll see if they're successful in that. But as far as hurting for cap space, the Broncos are one of the top 6 or 7 teams in the league and have the potential to be a top 4 team, give or take, with just a few moves.
I don't think it's necessarily about whether they can pay Von Miller that money. It's about whether they want to pay Von Miller that money for a guy who had single-digit sacks the last season he played and was out all of last season. I think, and also, George Payton doesn't have the emotional attachment to him that John Elway might have as, the best draft pick John Elway's ever had. So they can't afford Von Miller at that number, if they end up wanting to do that. To me, it's more of a principle thing of, hey, we don't know if he's worth that much money right now.
Well, and this is a classic end of the deal scenario. I mean, Peyton Manning threw 39 touchdowns, and they asked him to take a pay cut of, double-digit $1 million. So, this is how it goes. Even after you sign the huge deal, you get to the end, they're going to come talk to you about lowering your number, and they're going to talk to Von about it. And I think a lot of whether or not he stays here hinges on those conversations. I don't think they have him back at the number, even though they can afford it. And I think that's just the place they're in right now. Now, that can always change and as things move here. But George Paton was, like, you guys have said, this guy was brought in to run the football side, and this is the first sort of real few weeks that we've seen this. But he has no attachment. He didn't draft any of these players. He didn't sign any of these guys in free agency. And he's got the juice inside. This notion that he's somehow a figurehead is nowhere close to the reality. He's got the power. He can do what he wants when he wants, and ultimately it will be if Von would take a different number and what Peyton thinks that number should be.
Okay, George Paton, clearly not emotionally attached to Von Miller, but as a group here, let's take the emotions out of it as well. If you were a consultant for the Denver Broncos and George Paton, what would you advise him to do with Von Miller?
Find a contract price point that you are fine with, and you say, hey, look, this is our number. We're not going to exceed this number. This is where we're at. We want to make you a Bronco for life. We want you to be here. You are a part of what this franchise is, and one of the best players this franchise ever had. But unfortunately, we also want to keep this competitive window that we've built with this youthful roster together and allow ourselves the flexibility going forward to keep what we think we've built a potential contender together. So here's the number. Here's where we're at. And Von, if you want to be a part of this, this is where we're at. If not, we thank you kindly for your service, and we'll see you, on the other side.
I think they're playing it perfectly. I think, what we just kind of talked about is the right thing to do. The one thing I'll add is that I think, George Paton kind of has all the power in this situation. The Broncos don't have to be desperate to keep Von Miller around, but they can also offer him something that should be of value to him and you think would be of value to him, which is, to stay here. We'll throw some years on the end of that contract to try and keep you around and be a Bronco for life and not ever have to worry about putting on another uniform.
And some of it is, the information we don't get to look at right now is, they have the medical information of, now everyone has told me, this is not an injury that affects you after it heals, but, they've got all of the other medical information. He's north of 30 now, and that is an issue in the NFL. And in football, north of 30 is when you have to start making those tough calls, no matter how much you like the player, of what you're going to get down the road with what it costs against the salary cap. And that's why, if I'm a consultant for a player, you always say, get the guaranteed money right away. So when this stuff rolls around late in the contract, nobody's really mad about it. They just, like Ben said, you find the price point and you do it because you got the guaranteed money when you should have. And I think Von did on this deal. So I think that may help the Broncos' cause, actually.
All right, well, coming up after the break, just how different could the Broncos secondary look next season with decisions still to be made regarding safeties Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson? We'll tell you after the break. Welcome back for this final segment of Broncos Beat. Gentlemen, continuing the club option conversation from the last segment, along with Von Miller, safety Kareem Jackson is another key defensive player who has a $1.5 million option that the Broncos need to decide upon by March 16th. Broncos GM George Paton hasn't reached out to Jackson's agent quite yet, but what would you guys suspect that initial conversation could be like?
Well, I think the conversation eventually is going to be that they're going to pick it up. The Broncos haven't done a very good job of stocking the cupboard at the safety position, so I don't think they have all that many options here. You could go get another free agent. I don't think Vic Fangio or George Paton are going to be interested in starting a rookie at safety next season. So to me, it's the same thing with Justin Simmons. The Broncos don't have a Justin Simmons waiting in the wings like they did when they let go of TJ Ward back then. So to me, that conversation is going to be pretty easy. And eventually I think it'll be similar with Justin.
think RK is right. I think that if you look at this, the Broncos don't have depth at safety, and so you're going to have to look into picking these things up. They don't have a ton of leverage from that standpoint. And then, you saw these safeties having to cover down on rookie corners and backup corners a lot last year, and you saw how valuable it was to have safeties that could do that. With Kareem, yes, the age is a thing, but his play hasn't dropped off. So I think if you're the Broncos, you approach him and you say, look, here's your number. We're either going to restructure you, extend you, guarantee the number for this year out over the next couple of years, and kind of credit card this thing, or just tell them, hey, look, we'll play with you on this year, and then we'll see after that. With Justin Simmons, a little bit different situation. I mean, you're coming off the franchise tag. I know that they have not reached out to negotiate with him yet about a long-term deal. They were fairly close last year, a little over $500,000 apart per year. But with this particular situation, people think that you have to wait until the next league year to start renegotiating with the franchise tag player. That's not correct. You can negotiate with the player as soon as the season ends. So they could already do that. They have not reached out to Justin yet. He wants to be a Bronco. I can tell you, he wants to be a Bronco. He wants to be here. But he has a price point that he set. He wants to feel respected in the contract offer. And I think he's waiting to see what that's going to be like from George Paton.
To me, if you're not going to re-sign Justin Simmons, you might as well tell every guy in the locker room, there's not much you can do to get re-signed. I mean, he's performed on the field, he's performed off the field, he's in the youth career sweet spot. There's nothing on the resume that would preclude you. He's been healthy. Guy's played every snap for 3 years. Again, that Justin Simmons is the type of player a team has to re-sign if they're going to tell people in their locker room that we like homegrown players and we want to draft and develop. Well, Justin Simmons is the draft and develop player. And if you're going to re-sign Garrett Bowles, you better re-sign Justin Simmons. And at some point, the Broncos are going to have to make a player at or the highest paid player at the position. They were out front with Von Miller, and if they're willing to get out front with Justin Simmons and be the team that makes him one of the highest paid safeties in the league, then he will be here and everybody will have what they want. And they have no depth in the secondary anywhere. I mean, they have 3 corners on the roster under contract for next year who played more than 10 games last year, and 2 of them are coming off IR. So they need corners, they need safeties. It is a position that needs a lot of attention in free agency and the draft.
I was just thinking back to this time last year. We were all pretty sure that the Denver Broncos would get a long-term deal done with Justin Simmons, but now it seems like the odds are pretty high that he will play on the franchise tag, or at least attempt to be tagged yet again. What do you guys think the odds are that he's tagged this year?
High as a negotiating mechanism. I'm not sure Justin would play on the tag this year. Okay. They're going to do that to keep the market from being able to negotiate with him. He understands that. They understand that. Everybody knows that that's kind of what's coming. But Justin would be very disappointed if they did not get a long-term deal done. And I would suggest, as amenable as he was to playing on the tag last year, that he would probably not be amenable to playing on the tag this year.
And to me, it just comes back to what Leggy was saying. But as a football player, Justin is very close, if not completely deserving of that contract. But there's so much more that you have to take into account if you're the Broncos here. It's his work in the community. It's his leadership in the locker room. It's the way that he's liked by his teammates. This is more than just football. This is how you run a business, right? You have to reward the employees who do everything right. You got to give them the promotion. You got to give them the raise to show the rest of the room, hey, this is how it's done. This is the way you if you carry yourself like that guy, then you're going to get paid. And to me, the Broncos last year maybe got over, Ben, you said over less than $1 million. I think they got way too caught up in, hey, is he an elite safety? And they missed the main point, which is if he's not, he's only a little bit below that, and he makes up with that in so many other categories.
And I would say football people would say, he's an elite safety, and, by whatever metric, the guys who have more interceptions than he does, he plays the run better than they do. The guys who play the run better than he does, he has more range and is far better in space than they are. So from a football perspective, he's an elite safety. I just think it's been sort of a Bronco organizational mindset for a lot of years that they they were going to win every negotiation. And the guys who have re-signed here have often sort of taken what a lot of people would say are club-friendly deals. Derek Wolfe, Chris Harris, Garrett Bowles. Garrett Bowles took a team-friendly deal. So at some point, if you want to keep the guys you've developed, you gotta get to the front of the line. And I think this is a player. You don't do that on every guy. I'm not endorsing that. I'm endorsing on the guys who've done everything you say they should do. Those are the guys that get to go to the front of the line.
And honestly, they've had a pattern of being late on this. Like, not only should they be the front of the line, they should be a year earlier in these decisions. Don't let it get to the franchise tag. Don't let them get to the end of their deals. And you will save some money if you're willing to bet on the guys that you know better than anyone else in the league. You could have signed up Justin Simmons to a long-term deal a long time ago, and you would have been saving money right now.
Yeah, exactly. I just hope that when Madden updates his avatar, that they're not updating his jersey as well. All right, guys, that is all the time we have for this week's edition of Broncos Beat. As always, we will see y'all same time at same place next week.